In to our social media channels on Facebook and on YouTube. We're coming to you from different parts of the globe. I am Dwight reporting from Honolulu.
Hi, my name is Cupin, and I am in Manila this morning, Philippine time.
Yes, ang oras natin ay 6 o'clock dito sa Honolulu. And I am here because President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is visiting this place later this week, November 18. But before that, he is currently in San Francisco, California already, just in time for the gathering of foreign leaders for the 30th Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation or APEC Summit. So just to give you context, or to update our tracker, this is Marcos's 10th trip just for this year and 16th trip of since he became president. Ito rin yung second trip niya sa US for this year alone and third trip niya since maging presidente siya noong 2022. So actually yung kung bibilangin natin, the US now ties with Singapore and Indonesia sa listahan ng countries na binisita ni Marcos ng pinakamadaming beses. Lahat yon tigtatatlong beses. Yung unang beses na bumisita siya sa US noong naging presidente siya ay noong September 2022 for the United Nations General Assembly, and the second time was just later this year for the second time was in May this year for an official working visit na sinamahan din niya ng pagbisita sa White House sa Washington DC. Si President Marcos, nakikriticize siya recently for his jet-setter lifestyle, for often going out of the country to attend to these international gatherings. Pero ang depensa ng Malacanang ay para naman daw ito mag-yield ng investments that will help the country overcome the pandemic or recover from the pandemic. Actually, nung nag-arrive si President Marcos, nung dumating siya kanina sa San Francisco, yung first agenda niya was to meet with the San Francisco Filipino community. At doon, ni-reiterate niya yung depensa ng Malacanang palagi kapag bumibisita sila ng ibang bansa. Yun nga na yung umaasa siya na yung bisita niya dito, yung pagbisita niya sa US, would attract more investments to the Philippines. At kanina din sa bisita niya sa San Francisco, dun sa Filipino-American community there, ay kanya ring pinakilala yung mga members ng kanyang delegation. Kasama na dito syempre yung constant companions niya na sina First Lady Liza Araneta Marcos at House Speaker Martin Romualdez. At this time, several members of the cabinet. This includes Finance Secretary Ben Jokno, Public Works Secretary Manuel Bonoan, Tourism Secretary Cristina Frasco, Trade Secretary Fred Pascual, Transport Secretary Jimmy Bautista, Energy Secretary Rafael Lotilla, ICT Secretary Ivan Uy, NEDA Secretary Arsenio Balisacan, nandiyan din si Budget Secretary Amena Pangandaman, Special Assistant to the President Anton Lagdameo, at Presidential Advisor on Investments Frederick Go. Tapos nalaman din natin na si Deputy Speaker Ralph Recto is also part of the contingent. Siguro noticeable na kasi last year, tingnan natin yung delegation, and doon si former Deputy Speaker Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo na minsang tinawag ni President Marcos na secret weapon sa kanyang mga international visits. Pero Congresswoman GMA is not present in this year's APEC Summit. Bea, is this delegation considerably larger? And since I'm also passing the ball to you, I'll also want to ask, gaano ba ka-importante itong APEC Summit and what do we really expect to come out of this?
Actually, Marcos himself said it in his speech earlier sa Filipino community event. No, this is one of his larger delegations ever. Parang actually, yung last delegation to his first trip to the US, the one for the ONGA in New York, parang yun lang yung ka-level nito kung baga. Kasi the entire economic team is with him. We haven't seen all of the economic managers flying in with Marcos for a foreign trip in quite a long time, no? So I guess it's also because it's his first time in the West Coast of United States. And like you mentioned, nga, actually, yung debut, kumbaga, ni former President Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo was during APEC last year
Mm.
to Bangkok. And ostensibly, one of the reasons sinama din ata siya was because it would be in Bangkok, was the first bilateral meeting ni President Marcos at ni President Xi Jinping of China. Of course, Xi Jinping is very familiar with Representative Arroyo. She had quite warm ties with Beijing, China during her presidency. Kaya nga siya tinawag. Dwight mentioned, tinawag siyang secret weapon, which leads me to talk about the APEC. No? Parang nasa primer na rin to ni Dwight na yung APEC is about the economic discussions primarily. That's the whole point of APEC. I think the theme ng US yung sustainability. But observers will tell you na when we cover APEC, what we actually, kung nakatutok tayo sa side events, sa bilateral meetings that happen in between sessions, outside sessions, before sessions, like I said in Bangkok, di ba, it was Marcos's first time to meet with Xi Jinping as president of the Philippines. And in this year's APEC, yung inaabang naman na meeting again with Xi Jinping but not Marcos. This time it's with US President Joe Biden. So those are the things na it's very rare to see heads of government, heads of state. In the context of APEC, they're called heads of economy. Come together in one venue. So yun, parang as much as it's important to talk about the economy, to listen to what leaders have to say, unlike, let's things like ASEAN, na parang doon yung opportunity for, let's say, President Marcos to lay out the Philippines' position on the South China Sea, tensions in the South China Sea. Parang this is not so much the venue for that, but the APEC is an opportunity to speak to, whether formally or informally, with both allies and partners, or even countries or leaders na medyo may rough patch in the case of China, perhaps.
Yes.
Right.
And after nung APEC Summit na yun, hindi lang naman kasi yun yung agenda ni President Marcos dito sa US. After his visit to San Francisco, first he will go to Los Angeles for another visit with the Filipino community there. And yung last stop niya will be here in Honolulu, Hawaii, where he will also visit the Filipino community. Pero symbolic or important itong visit niya dito sa Hawaii because if we will remember, ito yung lugar kung saan nag-exile yung buong pamilya ng mga Marcoses noong 1986 after silang mapatelsek ng People Power Revolution. So February 26, 1986, the entire Marcos family arrived here with little belongings na-empake nila. And they spent 5 years here in exile. Well, si former President and dictator Marcos Sr. only spent 3 years here because this is the place where he died. And kahit si President Marcos Jr., he remembers his time here as, he describes it as among the dark days of his life. Not just his life, but he considers it as a dark day for the country when they arrived here. And when they said, sabi ng pamilyang Marcos, they were tricked daw into going to this place because they supposedly wanted to go to Ilocos, or they were initially initially daw na sinabi sa kanila ay dadalhin daw sila sa Lawago, sa Paway. Pero eventually daw ay dinala sila dito sa Hawaii. So that was one of the myths of the of that time, although may mga fact check pieces na tayo before na sinabi naman that the Marcos family persuaded the dictator na dapat sama-sama daw silang pumunta dito sa Hawaii. So yung Ilocos angle ay hindi natuloy. So maliban pa roon, sabi ni Marcos Jr. In a 1989 interview, ito quote from him: "The very basic fundamental question is whether or not we belong here. We do not. Home is in the Philippines." Despite that, based on news reports from that time, even though the Marcoses lived on exile here, they continued living a lavish lifestyle. And sabi pa ni Imelda Marcos noon, she was homesick daw here and they really wanted to come home. And si Marcos Jr., yung anak, si President Marcos, he considered it na parang isa sa mga failed aspirations ng kanyang ama ay makabalik sa Pilipinas. Ay hindi na niya kasi nagawa yun kasi nga namatay siya noong 1989. Finally, noong 1991, nakabalik ng Pilipinas the rest of the Marcos family because the Corazon Aquino government allowed them to face their criminal and civil cases against them back in the Philippines. So it's interesting kung pagbalik niya dito sa Hawaii, he's no longer the man who was on exile. Is now the man who rose from the ashes and became president after a decades-long rehabilitation project to rehabilitate the image of their family. So it is expected that he will bring up memories of those time kapag dumalik siya dito sa Hawaii. Pero maybe in a more positive light or maybe in a way that sort of redemption arc for their family. That's how we see the parang ganun niya if-frame yung pagbalik niya dito sa Hawaii. But it's not his only agenda. He is also set to visit the US Indo-Pacific Command. And Bea, why is it important that a Philippine president is visiting that area? And did previous presidents make that visit to the US Indo-Pacific Command?
Actually, it's rare in general for a head of government, head of state in this case, no, the president is both head of government and head of state, to visit the headquarters of a military command in this context, the Indo-Pacific pa. So, parang it was Nikkei actually who first broke the story. Later on, the DFA of the Philippines confirmed that President Marcos would be visiting yung Indo-Pac Command. Nikkei noted that it was quite unusual diplomatically for a head of state to visit a command of the U.S. military. But then you have to understand the context of this visit. No? Parang speaking of framing, Dwight mentioned it earlier, President Marcos himself framed this visit, not just the Indo-Pac visit, but the entire visit to the west coast of the United States, na para bang this is a continuation daw, or parang it builds on yung earlier visit ni Marcos back in May to Washington, D.C. on the East Coast. Again, during that visit, Dwight mentioned nga, there was a bilateral meeting between U.S. President Joe Biden and President Marcos at the White House, but also during that trip, he went to the Pentagon, yung headquarters ng Defense Department ng United States. He was given full honors, and during that meeting or after that meeting with the Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin of the United States, the Philippines and the US announced yung guidelines to cover that governs the MDT, to clarify certain points. That was one thing that Marcos and his defense chiefs had been talking about. That there is a need to clarify, especially given the tensions in the South China Sea, which also Marcos mentioned during yung Filipino community gathering kanina sa San Francisco. Pahapyaw lang na mention, actually sabi niya meron daw tayong problema sa South China Sea. A very almost hilarious understatement na given na parang just a few days ago during a resupply mission to Ayungin Shoal, the China Coast Guard used a water cannon against one of the resupply ships. Andun ulit yung constant harassment. It has been stepping up, in fact, and China deployed the most number of vessels it has so far during a routine resupply mission. So, in the context of the South China Sea, in the context of other destabilizing events around the world, you have tragedies of war in Ukraine, war that Israel is waging on Gaza, thereby disrupting the Middle East. No? Parang yung nabanggit ni President Marcos is it's important to touch base, to speak with our allies. Use the word allies, but I think it also extends to our partners, like-minded countries, kumbaga yung parating sinasabi nila, na to make sure that we are on the same page perhaps, or see what commonalities we have amid these geopolitical tensions, not just in the Indo-Pacific but elsewhere in the world. Yung context din siguro nito, no, parang just a few weeks ago naman during Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's visit to Manila, nag-announce yung Philippines at ng Japan na they are starting talks on yung parang visiting forest agreement like deal with Tokyo naman, yung VAA yung tinatawag nila, thereby expanding yung defense ties ng Philippines and Japan, again with the backdrop being tensions in the South China Sea as China becomes more aggressive in harassing Philippine ships. And speaking of Kishida, he is expected to be at the APEC Summit. Gusto ko lang i-point out din na one, President Marcos did not mention the Indo-Pacific Command during his departure message yesterday here in Manila. And two, the palace seemed to minimize the visit. Parang nung sa briefing with the palace briefer Daphne Osenia Paez, parang it was quite cut short when reporters started pressing on the details of the Indo-Pac Command visit, the significance. Parang there's an impression that, or there's a feeling that the palace seems to want to minimize siguro ahead of the visit, although obviously we do expect a release after to give us details ano bang pinag-usapan, ano ba yung landmark or kung may agreements man ba, although we don't expect that kasi command lang naman yun. So yung Indo-Pacific Command pala, sa mga nanonood lang, it's the biggest command of the unified command under the the US military rather. It covers the entire Indo-Pacific. Kasama dito yung bases ng US sa Japan, bases nito sa Korea, South Korea, Taklaw, yung yung high seas that surround the Philippines, for instance. For instance, in Balikatan, a bulk of the soldiers that are deployed to the Philippines come from the Indo-Pacific Command. Kumbaga, tensions in the South China Sea are absolutely the concern of the Indo-Pacific Command. So that makes it quite interesting, and we look forward to hear from the US and from the Philippines kung ano bang pag-uusapan doon ni President Marcos.
Yes. So definitely wait and see tayo dahil for the coming days, what this visit by the president in the US would mean sa laban natin sa West Philippine Sea, sa South China Sea, and of course on various issues including the economy, and what this visit would mean in further rehabilitating the image of the Marcos family. So
actually, Dwight nga, no? Parang in every visit of Marcos to the US, na-highlight yung sobrang complicated na relationship ng Marcos family ng Philippines at ng US. Kasi sa New York, dun sila nag-meet ni First Lady Lisa. And how did they meet? Kasi Marcos was attending hearings against his family. Right? Parang it's quite interesting. And then the White House, last time he visited, it was while his father was president, while the dictator was in good graces still with the United States. And even if the United States technically pumalas from Marcos Sr., tinan mo naman, kumbaga, they let him stay in Hawaii, that the family stay in Hawaii on exile. So, very interesting relationship there.
Yeah, he cannot escape that reality. Every time bibisita siya ng US, yung past ng US at ng pamilya niya palaging mauungkat, and hanggang ngayon actually in the coming days we will try to talk to the Filipino community here in Hawaii. We will listen to their sentiments if meron pa bang opposition movement here or how they try to keep alive the memory of the past kahit pa ngayong si President Marcos or isang Marcos na naman ang Pangulo ng Pilipinas. So tuned in to our coverage sa Rappler. We will be publishing numerous tech stories. We have a live updates thread. We will publish videos here and there. So please continue to watching our coverage. I am Dwight De Leon with Bea Cupin, and this is Rappler.